So you're welcome back. This is Newsfile, it's the most authoritative news analysis platform, and here on Newsfile we put Ghana first. And I'm privileged to be hosting this special edition together with Dr. Mame Abena-Mensah Bonsu, and our guests have been delivering. Now we invite you, if you are driving past Joy FM, just stop and ask for a copy of the Constitution. You'll be handed one. If you are driving past Joy FM Kokomlemle, just stop and ask for a copy of the Constitution. And we're going to plead with our other guests, if you can stick to 15 minutes in your presentation, we'll be exceedingly glad. Mame, take over. Please unmute your mic.
Sorry about that.
Right.
I'm honored to introduce our next guest, Professor Baffour Agyeman-Duah, who is the CEO of the John A. Kufuor Foundation. Professor Agyeman-Duah has served with the United Nations. He served for quite a long time, a decade, as Senior Governance Advisor with the UNDP Tanzania and UNMIL Liberia. Prior to that, he was an Associate Executive Director of the Center for Democratic Development, which he co-founded in 1998, and of which I'm a proud D&D Fellow. Professor Agyeman-Duah was a Fulbright Scholar, Fulbright Professor at the Lagos Center for International Affairs of the University of Ghana from 1994 to 1996, and he taught African politics at Bennett College and the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, United States, between 1985 and 1994. The professor has published a number of monographs and articles in scholarly journals, which are quite respected across the world. We're honored to have you with us, Professor Baffour Agyeman-Duah, and if I may now invite you to go ahead with your case for constitutional review. Could we unmute the professor, please?
All right, you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Thanks, Samson, and for having me. I want to begin by paying tribute to those who really helped to produce the 92 Constitution. The Constitution upholds democracy to be the only form of government we should cherish, and has therefore given us a framework that has sustained democratic rule for 30 years. Today, we enjoy political predictability, and we change or retain governments every 4 years in relative peace. So no wonder Ghana today is lauded globally as one of the most stable and thriving democracies. So we have to appreciate the 92 Constitution. Unfortunately, however, the accolade appears to impress few Ghanaians. The applause for attaining a stable electoral democracy seems to have little meaning or significance to many Ghanaians. Not because people are oblivious of the achievement, but because of the growing disenchantment with practiced democracy in the country and the seeming failure of governance to yield both material and psychic dividends. The realization has dawned that elections by themselves do not make successful democracy. The relevance of practiced democracy is the issue at stake. If this key concern, practiced democracy, is real, and I believe it is, then a case should be made for a review of the 92 Constitution, which provides the framework for practiced democracy and governance in the country. I should perhaps at this point clarify the concept of democracy to make my presentation better understood and more meaningful. Like the two-edged sword, democracy has two mutually inclusive sides: principled democracy and practiced democracy. The first side, principled democracy, refers to the universal principles and values that all human beings deserve in order to live wholesome and dignified lives. Embedded in principled democracy is respect for freedom, liberty, justice, rule of law, and rights, values that uphold the dignity of the human life. These are what I call the intangibles of democracy, and controversies over their relevance are rare. The other side, practice democracy, refers to institutions, systems, and human agency that must function to actualize the principles or values. The creation of this practical or tangible side of democracy must be informed and guided by the society's own history, tradition, and culture. So while principled democracy, which seeks to dignify the human life, is universal and written in stone, so to speak, practice democracy is variable and flexible and is based on the peculiarities of a society. This differentiation accounts for the varying ways democracy is practiced around the world. Democratic practice is therefore not a straitjacket, a one-size-fits-all affair. And this is where the controversies abound. From my perspective, much of the growing public frustration and disenchantment with governance in Ghana today come from the shortfalls in practice democracy. Our democratic practice is increasingly exclusive, divisive, and extremist, and is hampering economic progress. Most observers attribute the condition of exclusion, division, and extremism to the winner-takes-all electoral system, which is monopolized by two political parties, the NPP and the NDC. In this duopoly, a party winning elections, even with 1 percentage point, takes complete possession of the state, from the national to the local levels. The politics of exclusion, which is embedded in the winner-takes-all system, is perhaps the key reason for the heightened unhealthy rivalry between the NDC and the NPP. The rabid partisanship has led to any party in opposition having to simply oppose and discredit the government of the day. It has led to the disgusting habit of claims and counterclaims over who built this road or that school. The unhealthy rivalry has led to the abandonment of projects initiated by preceding governments, irrespective of their relevance and how much has been sunk into it. Above all, it has led to short-sighted approach to development. Meanwhile, political party organization and electoral politics have been highly monetized. They have become a game for the rich and corrupt, as admitted publicly by some failed candidates. Votes of delegates at party primaries are bought, and the highest bidder often wins. At the national level, presidential candidates sell themselves with gifts and phantom promises. Needless to say, the cost of participation and the embedded corruption in party politics have excluded many individuals with promise, young and old, who otherwise would opt for public service. The dire consequences of corruption of the political process for our development have led to recent calls for state-funded political parties. Another key area where practice democracy in Ghana seems to have flopped is the actualization of political participation. For 30 years, we have limited the concept of participation to general elections and the multiplicity of the media that makes it possible for all voices from all corners to be heard. Not surprisingly, but sadly, many among us have reduced democracy to kambi, free speech and expression. The true meaning of political participation is for people having a direct role in decision-making on issues and policies that affect their lives. To a large extent, being able to determine their own destinies. That, I believe, is the idea behind local government as spelled out in Article 240 of the Constitution. However, the structure of governance has been such that decentralization that should ensure participation has been rendered meaningless. Participation should be bottom-up rather than top-down. Indeed, the bottom should be the breeding grounds for national politics. We find that vibrant democracies are where participation is more vigorous at the grassroots, with communities meeting, deciding, and charting their future. That is what I believe the Constitution designed the District Assembly for. Future leaders must gain experience in governance from the grassroots of politics, not just from university, getting into politics and being made ministers without any experience, never bought a bicycle, built a house, nothing, become a minister. Corruption is planted there. But as I say, for 30 years of this republic, we can only speak of administrative, not political or fiscal decentralization that empower the assemblies to serve their true purpose. Political and fiscal power is retained at the central government, and the districts are made to beg for development projects from the ruling elite in Accra. Doesn't it strike you when on their rounds in the regions and districts, presidents are begged for mundane things like toilets? Why should a newly constructed school building in a village be locked up until some big man from Accra is available to declare it open? The Constitution, Article 242A, appear to require the statutory funds earmarked for district through the Assembly Fund, the Common Fund, are kept in Accra and released at the pleasure of the Minister of Finance. Reportedly, no government of this republic has ever paid up fully on the District Assembly Common Fund. In this case, tardiness and incompetence or recklessness as central government easily afflicts and disrupts governance and development at the districts. What our centralized democratic practice has done is to reduce the people into beggars, just as the central government, with bow in hand, begs foreign donors. Apart from those at the top of the political hierarchy, and mostly centered in the capital city, few Ghanaians have the opportunity to participate, to change their circumstances. Development thinking and initiation emerge mainly from the top, as if those at the bottom are incapable of their own salvation. So constitutional provisions for ensuring transparency and accountability appear weak and shrinking by the day. This is what is leading public officials oftentimes to act recklessly and with impunity in managing the country's resources. Corruption and naked thievery are therefore rampant across the board. Within the context of transparency and accountability is the idea of separation of powers in a democracy. It is to enable each of the three arms of government, the executive, legislature, and judiciary, to stay independent so they can hold each other in check and to account. Yet, the 92 Constitution invests so much power in the executive that the other two institutions seem subdued. The requirement for the president to appoint majority of ministers, as has been said previously, that weakens the latter, that's the legislature, in holding the former in check. The Constitution gives almost limitless discretionary and appointive powers to the president. And the power to appoint goes way beyond the cabinet, senior civil servants, and heads of state agencies to district assembly members. Even appointment to institutions classified by the Constitution as independent are to be made by the president, who is a partisan. Yet, we expect these bodies to be neutral. So apart from the so-called independent bodies, the Constitution places no limit on numbers and levels to be appointed. This loophole and the discretion to create ministries and agencies at will enables self-aggrandizing presidents to indulge in creating and dishing out positions with or without justification and unmindful of the burden on the taxpayer. Increasingly, presidential appointments have become the means to creating jobs for party members, friends, and family. That is why debates and controversies have emerged in recent times over the number of ministers, Supreme Court justices, directors and CEOs, and their deputies of state agencies the president ought to appoint. The latest attempt by Parliament to block the president's ministerial appointments was premised on the popular call for reduction in the size of government. The foregoing cases of constitutional lapses are among the reasons why strong voices have emerged, including mine, for reviewing the 92 Constitution. Despite its beneficence, the Constitution has so many deficits that upend good governance. So we must review it and get it right this time. While appreciating the diligence with which the Constitution was framed, we should also recognize its unique and unhealthy circumstance of birth. It came against the backdrop of 11 years of illiberal and intimidating military rule of the PNDC. And it's the same regime that supervised the framing of the Constitution. The regime indeed resisted change and only yielded when it could no longer stand against the wind of change. The wind included assertive civil society, the donor community, and the global democratic tidal wave unleashed by the collapse of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s. So the Constitution and the transition to liberal democracy in 1993, therefore, cannot be said to have been given on a silver platter or out of the goodness or democratic proclivities of the PNDs. It was rushed, given the circumstance, and therefore it missed critical introspection and debate. So far, three schools of thought emerged regarding the debate on constitutional review. The first group of people are called the rejectionists, are people who believe that's not necessary at this time because they believe the Constitution has served us well. So if it ain't broken, why fix it? They seem to say. Then there's a second school of thought. That is those who prefer limited reforms or, just tampering with the amendments. They want us to be careful. We should not rush to amend. And I think President Akufo-Addo's comments we saw at the beginning of the program reflects that. Then the third school of thought, those who want comprehensive review, that's a radical view in this context. It's found mostly among young people and civil society groups who are impatient and show extreme frustration with the status quo. They want change, either by reviewing, reforming, or amending it. I understand that constitutions should not be needlessly tampered with. The American Constitution, which is 234 years old, has been amended only 27 times, most recently in 1992, though there have been over 11,000 proposed amendments since it became operational in 1789. However, and this is important, however, we should not miss the reason why the American and other veteran democracies have preserved and avoided unnecessary tampering of their constitutions. Their draft constitutions were written following lengthy, elaborate, and meticulous preparation, including extensive and intense intellectual debates. They also paid heed to the practiced democracy by being guided by their history, tradition, and culture. They did not copy blindly from others. And I believe we cannot say the same for our 92 Constitution. That's why I make the case for reviewing our Constitution. And I have a few recommendations. First of all, I think we should advance inclusive politics by introducing proportional representation, a system where parties gain seats in parliament in proportion to the number of votes that they obtain in elections. And this, I think, will bring more parties into parliament. It will mitigate the unbridled partnership and the winner takes all syndrome. We should also redefine power distribution between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary to enhance accountability between governance and structures at the local level. And I think local governance should be enhanced with political and fiscal decentralization so that the assemblies can become the key agencies for community development. We should also think seriously and see a more dynamic role for chiefs at the local level in the districts. Chiefs can be made district assembly presiders so that they can be part and parcel. After all, they own the lands in these areas. Then my biggest takeaway, I should say, let me veer a little bit. I think we can even begin to think outside the box. Given the intense rivalries and all these kind of things, why can't we think seriously about a uniting for peace and progress agenda, an interim special constitutional arrangement for a unity or union government. We shouldn't be afraid of the word union because it's been used previously. Because I think if you look at the fact that all the countries that were in league with in the 1950s have moved beyond third world position to second and first world, Singapore, Malaysia, and all of them. They all spent about 20 to 30 years to change their circumstances. In Africa, I think Rwanda, President Kagame is almost in the same mode. Within 20 years, Rwanda has changed, all because there's unity of purpose. There's a single vision towards development. There's no kahoo like we find. You don't get parliamentarians throwing punches. All that, I think we can stop it if we come together declaring uniting for peace and progress for 20 years, and let's have a focused development. And I think we can see a real change in our country. I think on that note, I will yield.
Thank you very much.
Spami, what comments would you have about what Professor Baffour Agyeman-Duah has delivered?
Yeah, I think that we see the district assemblies coming up in several presentations.
Yes.
And decentralization seems to be a big thing with us. It's since the constitutional process began, we've been talking about decentralization, participation, grassroots, but everybody seems dissatisfied. And personally, I think the district assemblies are currently our most useless expenditure on our budgets, because it is structured to make no impact, to just, it's like fetching water with a sieve. So we really do need to rethink the district assemblies. It's not just a question of electing the DCEs. That is an important part of it, but perhaps we should consider more thoroughly what they've been set up for, how we can achieve those goals, and how we fund them. And that critically will help us make use of it. As Professor said, the chiefs are an important part of our lives. They're not going anywhere. And they have a lot of social capital and a system that, when it's working, works. What we have done, I think, currently is kind of take them out of the system in a way that does not give them accountability for what we do or do not achieve together. And so they operate kind of in a parallel way. And I think bringing them into the system a bit more might be a useful way to proceed, though we must be careful to not create the kind of collusion that the colonial state created with the chiefs. So that's a place we have to do some real thinking and make use of what we have, rather than try and erase them. My challenge with the Unigov proposal is not the union government itself. It's that Prof hasn't given us any real verbs. When we talk of coming together and focusing on a development agenda, what does that mean? How do we do it? I think part of our constitutional narrative has always been lofty sentiments, but translating the sentiments into action has always proved a little bit more illusionary. So I think while the idea of having a 20-year, say, development project, national journey is not in itself a bad idea, and it's a great thing, and that's in essence what our constitution was supposed to be, I think we have to speak more clearly in how we do that. How do we come together? Do we hold rallies? Do we call a conference? Do we change our educational syllabus so our children are thinking about national development goals by the time they're in year 5? What are the actual verbs of coming together? That would be what I would like Prof to address later when we get a chance to engage.
All right.
Sure.
Great.